In a crumbling house on Detroit's west side, a single mother pays $1 for a roof that leaks and walls that remember other people's sorrow. The powerful circle like hawks, the vulnerable keep their heads down. But inside those boards lies a quiet truth that will test hearts and heal an old wound. Stay with this story. Subscribe, like the video, and tell us where you're watching from. The January wind came off the river with a blade in it, cutting through Angela Reed's thrift store coat as she turned the loose key in the swollen door. The house on Brayburn Street, Brightmoor, Detroit, smelled of wet plaster and old cigarettes. Damp crept up from the basement, and the floor spoke in long groans. A cracked window rattled in its frame as a bus sighed past, spraying slush. Her son, Malik, hugged a thin backpack, and his breath came white in the stale air. You could taste the dust, chalky, bitter, and hear the soft drip of meltwater inside the walls. Across the street, a black SUV idled with expensive impatience. Preston Hale stepped out, all leather gloves and superior smile, the kind of man whose shoes never met a puddle. He walked the sidewalk as if it belonged to him, and regarded the peeling paint like it had insulted him personally. $1, he said to no one in particular, voice warm as a polished mahogany table. Some things are overpriced. Angela felt the sting of it and steadied herself with a hand on the doorframe, its wood splintered and cold. She thought of the cashier job that disappeared when the store closed, the rent she couldn't outrun, and the shelter's bleach-scrubbed nights. Her fingers brushed a bent nail, its rust thin as cinnamon. Malik stood a little behind her, eyes alert, taking it all in. The SUV's hum, the cologne on the wind, the way grown men looked at their block and saw only numbers. Preston slid a business card under a brick by the walkway and tipped 2 fingers in a lazy goodbye. The SUV rolled off, tires whispering through gray slush. Angela stepped inside, closed the door against the wind, and let the heavy, aching silence fall, thick as wool and full of unsaid things. Before Detroit, there had been Toledo, and before that, the promise of a man who said he'd stay. Life had shrunk to what Angela could carry: a slow cooker, 2 bowls, 3 towels, and the small snow globe Malik won at a church raffle in Wyandotte. Inside the globe, a tiny Belle Isle bridge arched over glitter that no longer moved. The glass had cracked last summer when it fell from a shelf, and the water seeped out, leaving the flakes glued in place. It had once meant someday. Now it was just wait. She set it on a windowsill that smelled faintly of old potatoes and sun-heated dust. Outside, a distant siren stitched the afternoon to the past. Somewhere, a neighbor's radio murmured Motown through thin walls, and a barking dog answered. Malik rubbed his hands together and blew on his fingers, smile trying to climb back, onto his face. He had her eyes, dark, steady, and a way of noticing the world's small mercies. Heat from a laundromat doorway, a free apple at a food pantry, the way light made even broken glass look like jewels. Mrs. Ortiz from 2 houses down knocked with a casserole pan still warm, steam fogging the bitter air. Her kitchen had always smelled like cumin and onions, comfort traveling on the breath. For your first night, she said, a neighborhood is made at the table. Angela felt the metal's heat in her palms, and with it a kindness she had nearly forgotten belonged to ordinary days. Later, in the dim, with a borrowed lamp humming, Angela ran her thumb over the snow globe's crack. She had lost a marriage, a job, and the last landlord's patience, but not Malik, and not the small, stubborn belief that a life could turn. Even with the glitter stuck, she kept the globe, proof that dreams sometimes stall before they move again. By February, the house had a heartbeat made of tasks. Angela patched holes with drywall dust that made her throat burn, and pulled bent nails with pliers that squeaked like mice. The hallway smelled of damp cardboard and the metallic tang of old wiring. Then the city inspector came, crisp and indifferent, leaving a yellow notice that fluttered like a warning flag. Fines for code violations, condemnation on the horizon if repairs lagged. The paper made a brittle sound in the cold. The blow landed deeper than her coat could cushion. Fines meant choosing between heat and hope. Malik's teacher called about a late assignment. You could hear cafeteria clatter behind her voice, the messy chorus of other children's normal days. Angela counted change at the kitchen counter by the pale light of a crooked fixture, each coin a small echo. Preston returned, this time with a lower voice and a higher offer, a rehearsed sigh at the wasted potential of a parcel like yours. She declined, and his smile thinned. That night, the old house talked. A floorboard lifted in a slow exhale, and a draft slipped through a hairline crack near the baseboard, smelling faintly of dry paper and something like camphor. Malik pressed his ear to the wall and tapped. The sound wasn't hollow, it was layered, dense, as if the house had swallowed a secret and learned to breathe around it. He looked at his mother, curiosity sparking like a match. Angela, bone-tired, stared at the yellow notice and felt panic rise like cold water. She sat on the floor and let her back touch the wall. In the quiet, she remembered a story Mrs. Ortiz once told about the old families here. Auto workers who hid nest eggs in coffee tins during strikes. Women who stitched cash into curtains. Her mind, raw from worry, snagged on a thread of possibility. She closed her eyes, listened deeper, and heard it again. A faint rattle like paper shivering, somewhere inside the bones of the house. On a Saturday bright with brittle sun, Malik found the loose vent cover in the kitchen, the screws stripped soft by time. He was looking for a lost marble following a roll and a stop, that small thud children understand with their whole bodies. The air drifting from the duct was cool and dry, scented with dust and a whisper of cedar. He shined a cheap flashlight into the narrow dark and saw a corner of tin winking back. "Mom!" His voice bounced off the bare walls, vibrating with discovery. "I found something!" Angela appeared in the doorway, hands dusted white from sanding, a faded bandana holding back her hair. Fatigue had carved shadows beneath her eyes, but curiosity lit them now as she knelt beside her son. The floor creaked beneath them, the house joining their conversation. "What is it, baby?" she asked, peering into the darkness where Malik's flashlight beam trembled. "Something metal, looks like a box," he said, fingers already reaching into the duct, stretching until his shoulder pressed against the cold metal edge. "I can almost... got it." They worked slowly. Angela with a butter knife and patience, Malik with steady hands and the focus that only a boy on a mission can hold. The tin box emerged like an old turtle from mud, lid rusted at the hinge, weight surprising. When Angela pried it open, the room filled with the papery breath of old things. Inside were envelopes tied with blue string, edges softened by decades, and a letter, its ink faded to the color of tea. "It's from someone who lived here before," Angela whispered, handling the paper as if it might dissolve between her fingers. The kitchen light flickered overhead, casting dancing shadows across the yellowed page. The handwriting belonged to another era. "If this finds you, I pray it finds you in need and in hope." It was signed by Edward Kowalski, 1957, an auto worker from the River Rouge plant who had once lived in this very house. He wrote of layoffs and solidarity, of a wife named Irene whose soup smelled like dill, of a strike fund, and a quiet wish to leave something for the next family who makes their life here. Beneath the letter lay stock certificates, Ford Motor Company, face values modest and dates scattered over years when men wore hats to meetings. "What are those papers, Mom?" Malik asked, his finger tracing the embossed edges of a certificate. Angela's hands trembled as she read aloud, words catching like fish in a net. The paper felt fragile and alive under her fingertips. "These are stock certificates from Ford Motor Company." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "This man, Edward, he bought them little by little. He says he wants to help whoever finds them." Malik's eyes widened, breath held as if movement might scare it all away. "Are they worth anything?" "I don't know, baby." "Maybe." She carefully gathered the documents, feeling their weight. Not just physical, but historical, emotional. The kitchen suddenly seemed less cold, the broken cabinets less urgent, the yellow notice less final. That evening, as the streetlights buzzed to 2 a.m., life outside, casting amber pools on dirty snow, Angela sat at their wobbly table. Mrs. Ortiz had brought over her nephew who worked at a bank downtown. His fingers moved carefully over the certificates, eyes widening behind wire-rimmed glasses. "These need to be authenticated, of course," he said, voice hushed with respect. "But if they're real, and I think they are, Miss Reed, this could change everything." The words hung in the air like smoke, too fragile to touch. Malik, pretending to do homework at the counter, dropped his pencil. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. "How much?" Angela asked, not daring to hope. "I'd need an expert to value them properly, but these companies have split their stocks many times since the 50s, even with modest initial investments." He paused, calculating. It could be substantial, very substantial. That night, after Malik had fallen asleep, Angela stood by the window watching the snow drift past streetlights. The broken snow globe sat on the sill, its frozen glitter catching the orange glow from outside. She thought of Edward Kowalski, a man she'd never met, writing a letter to a future he'd never see, tucking away a small fortune for strangers. She thought of his wife Irene with her dill-scented soup, of their lives in this same house, walking these same creaking floors. News traveled the way it does in neighborhoods, through church pews and barber chairs, along the steam of tamales and the smoke of backyard grills. Mrs. Ortiz called her cousin, who knew a bank manager. The certificates went into a clear sleeve, and a soft-spoken appraiser in a wool scarf came with careful hands and a small glass. The number he murmured in the humming quiet of the living room, after splits, after decades, hung in the air like a bell. Something close to $1.8 million. The room seemed to tilt. Angela sat down hard on the sagging couch, its springs complaining beneath her. Malik gripped her hand, his palm warm and damp with excitement. "Mom," he whispered, "are we rich now?" Rich. The word seemed foreign, belonging to a language she'd never expected to speak. Rich was Preston Hale with his leather gloves and dismissive smile. Rich was walking past store windows without checking prices first. Rich was never having to choose between heat and food, between medicine and rent. "We have options now," she said carefully, the taste of the words strange on her tongue. "But we have to be smart. This isn't just money, it's trust." The appraiser nodded, closing his portfolio with a soft snap. "You'll want legal advice and financial planning. This kind of windfall can disappear quickly if not managed properly." Outside, Preston's black SUV cruised past, slowing as it always did when he surveyed what he considered future investments. Angela watched through the window as he noticed the appraiser's car, sleek, expensive, out of place on Brayburn Street. Preston's brake lights flashed red in the gray afternoon, a Bjuskai question mark hovering in the cold air. That night, with Malik asleep and the house settling around her, Angela read Edward Kowalski's letter again by lamplight. His words, written decades ago, seemed to speak directly to her present. "In times of hardship, we find who we truly are. In times of unexpected fortune, we decide who we wish to become." The community center on Fenkell smelled of floor polish and instant coffee, steam rising from metal urns set up along a back table. Plastic chairs creaked under the weight of winter coats and worried bodies. The city inspector, Mr. Daniels, sat near the back, face unreadable, yellow legal pad balanced on his knee. The room hummed with whispers and the rustle of papers, punctuated by the occasional squeal of the old heating system. Angela stood at the front, Malik's fingers looped through hers, the tin box on a folding table beside a bouquet of grocery store carnations. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making everything look slightly unreal. Snow slid in slow sheets down the narrow windows. You could hear people breathing. "Thank you all for coming," she began, voice steadier than her heartbeat. "I called this meeting because what happens on our block affects all of us." Eyes watched her. Neighbors she knew from borrowed cups of sugar and nodded greetings, city officials with weary faces, community organizers with hopeful ones. In the back, the door opened with a gust of cold air, and Preston Hale entered, brushing snowflakes from his camel hair coat, tie perfectly knotted at his throat. He found a seat without removing his coat, as if planning a quick exit. As most of you know, my son Malik and I moved into 4217 Brayburn 2 months ago. It's one of the dollar houses the city's been selling to try to stabilize the neighborhood. She glanced at the inspector, whose pen hovered over his pad. We've been trying to bring it up to code, but as Mr. Daniels has documented, there's a lot of work to be done. She told the room the story. Kowalski's letter, the strike fund, the wish left in these walls. She spoke plainly, voice steady, describing the cold nights and warm casseroles, the broken snow globe, and the way the house spoke if you let it. She did not ask for pity. She asked for time, for partnership, for the city to see the block not as parcels but as people. What Mr. Kowalski left wasn't just money, she said, lifting the letter edges soft as lace. He left a message about community, about what we owe each other. She read aloud, "I leave this not as charity, but as solidarity. May it serve the next family who makes their life here, and through them, the neighborhood that has sheltered us all." Something shifted in the room. The inspector's posture softened. Heads nodded. A murmur of amazement began in one corner and spread like a hymn. Mrs. Ortiz dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "So, here's what I'm proposing," Angela continued, unfolding a sheet of paper where she'd written her plan, in careful script. "First, we use part of the money to fully renovate our house. Not just a code, but beyond it. To make it a home that honors its history." The inspector nodded, making a note. "Second, we establish a neighborhood improvement fund, matching grants for other homeowners on the block who need help with repairs." She looked at her neighbors, saw hope dawning on faces that had grown accustomed to disappointment. Third, a scholarship in the name of Edward and Irene Kowalski for kids from Brightmoor who know about empty fridges and full hearts. The room was silent now, attention complete. "And finally," she said, her voice gaining strength, "we ask that the city partner with us. Pause the code enforcement actions on our block for 6 months while we implement these improvements. Work with us instead of against us." The city housing director leaned forward. "That's an unusual request, Miss Reed." "These are unusual circumstances," Angela replied. "And I think we all want the same thing, a neighborhood where people can live with dignity." Preston Hale stepped forward then, lips parted for the familiar sales pitch about highest and best use and market efficiency. He glanced at the appraiser's report now circulating among the officials, at the reporters who had somehow gotten wind of the story, their cameras raised, at Malik's thin coat and solemn eyes. Whatever he had readied rang false in his own ears. He lowered his eyes. "Mr. Hale," Angela said, surprising herself with the calm in her voice. "You've been trying to buy our house, and others on the block, for months now. I understand the business logic, but I want you to understand something else." She walked toward him, holding the snow globe that had traveled with them from Toledo to the shelter to Brayburn Street. "This is broken," she said, holding it so he could see the crack, the glitter stuck in place. "But we keep it because it reminds us that sometimes things that seem frozen can move again. That's what this neighborhood is. Not a collection of parcels, but a place where lives can unstick and start moving again." Preston met her gaze not with his usual calculation, but with something like recognition. A woman who had remembered what a house should mean. The room, witnessing, rose to its feet in a slow wave. Later, as people filed out into the snowy evening, the housing director approached Angela with an extended hand. "We'll work with you," he said. "This is exactly the kind of community-led solution we've been hoping for." The inspector tore the yellow notice in half with a smile. "Consider it a fresh start," he said. Preston lingered near the door, watching as neighbors surrounded Angela with hugs and handshakes. Malik stood at her side, shoulders straighter than they had been that first day on Braeburn Street. When the crowd thinned, Preston approached them, hands deep in his coat pockets. "Ms. Reed," he said, voice quieter than she'd ever heard. I misjudged you. And I misjudged that house." Angela studied him. The expensive haircut, the manicured nails, the distance he maintained between himself and the world. "It's easy to see buildings and forget the people inside them," she said, not unkindly. "Maybe next time you drive down our street, you could stop. Have a cup of coffee, meet the neighbors." A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Maybe I will." He nodded to Malik. "You've got a remarkable mother, young man." As they walked home through gentle snow, street lamps casting warm pools of light on the sidewalk, Malik squeezed his mother's hand. "Mom," he said, voice low and sure, "did we win?" Angela looked down at him, at the face that had weathered so much change with such courage. "We didn't win, baby," she said softly. We remembered that houses are for people, not profit, that neighbors matter, that dignity isn't something anyone can sell for $1 or buy for $1 million. The house on Braeburn Street waited for them, windows glowing with borrowed lamps, the promise of tomorrow held in its patient walls. Spring came to Braeburn Street with the smell of thawed earth and motor oil. The last stubborn piles of gray snow retreated from curbs and corners, revealing lost mittens and forgotten toys. Angela woke each morning to the sound of birdsong mingling with the steady rhythm of hammers and the whine of power tools. The renovation had begun in earnest as soon as the ground thawed enough for cement work. Malik stood on the front porch watching as workers unloaded lumber from a truck, its fresh-cut scent sharp in the morning air. He wore a bright yellow hard hat that the foreman, Luis, had given him, several sizes too large but worn with undisguised pride. Angela smiled as she handed him his lunch bag. "Remember what Luis said," she reminded him. "You can watch, but stay behind the safety tape," Malik finished, grinning. "I know, Mom." The project manager, Darius Williams, approached with blueprints tucked under his arm, the paper crinkling in the spring breeze. He'd grown up 3 blocks over and had insisted on taking the job when he heard the story of Edward Kowalski's legacy. His voice carried the gravelly warmth of someone who knew houses from their bones outward. "Morning, Ms. Reed," he said, unrolling the plans on the porch railing. "We're starting on the electrical today. The wiring in this place is older than my grandma's stories." Angela nodded, studying the blue lines that would transform their skeletal house into something whole. "Will we need to move out during that part?" "Nah, we can work around you. Might be some hours without power, though." He glanced at Malik, who was attempting to look serious while balancing the oversized hard hat. "Maybe your assistant foreman there can help keep track of the schedule." Malik straightened, importance settling on his narrow shoulders like a cape. Inside, the house already felt different. The walls had been opened in places, revealing the secrets between studs. Old newspapers from 1953 used as insulation, a child's marble that must have rolled away decades ago, a faded movie ticket stub. Each discovery was like touching the past, reminders that their story was just one of many held within these walls. As Angela headed to work, a new job at the community credit union that had opened 2 months ago, she passed Mrs. Ortiz watering early tulips that pushed through the dark soil beside her front steps. "The house is looking good," Mrs. Ortiz called, resting a hand on her lower back. "Edward and Irene would be proud." Angela paused, letting the morning sun warm her face. "I keep thinking about them, wondering what they were like." Mrs. Ortiz nodded, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "My Tio Ramon knew them a little. Said Edward never missed a day at the plant, and Irene made pierogi that would make you cry. They lost a baby early on. Never had more children. Maybe that's why they left what they did. Family finding family across time." The words followed Angela throughout her day, settling into the spaces between thoughts. Family finding family across time. That evening, as she helped Malik with homework at the kitchen table, now moved to the living room while the kitchen underwent its transformation, she watched his pencil move across paper, his face a study in concentration. Mrs. Ortiz said the Kowalskis didn't have kids, she said softly. Malik looked up. So, who did they leave the money for? Us, people they never knew would exist. She touched the edge of the tin box which now sat on their makeshift mantel. I've been thinking about how to honor that. 2 days later, she met with a lawyer who spoke gently, the letter in a protective sleeve on the table between them. The office smelled of leather-bound books and coffee, a clock ticking with quiet authority on the wall. Outside, Detroit moved with spring energy, people shedding winter layers like old skins. A foundation, the lawyer said, tapping her pen against a yellow legal pad. You'd set aside a portion for the immediate needs, your home, your son's education, and the rest would go into a trust dedicated to the purposes you outlined at that community meeting. Angela nodded, the vision becoming clearer. The Kowalski Neighborhood Trust. Has a nice ring to it, the lawyer agreed, and it would ensure their legacy continues beyond just your family. By early May, the house's transformation had progressed enough that Angela and Malik could move back into their bedrooms upstairs. The new windows no longer rattled when buses passed, and the furnace hummed with the quiet efficiency of new machinery rather than the asthmatic wheeze of the old system. Malik's room now had built-in bookshelves painted a bright blue that made the space feel bigger, more alive. On a Saturday morning, while Darius's crew worked on the new front porch, Angela found Malik sitting cross-legged in his closet surrounded by paper and colored pencils. "What are you up to in here?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. He held up a rough sketch of their house. "I'm designing a plaque. For outside so everyone knows about the Kowalskis." Angela knelt beside him, the new carpet soft under her knees. "That's a beautiful idea." "I was thinking," Malik said, adding careful details to his drawing. "What if other houses have secrets too? What if there are more tin boxes out there?" The thought hung in the air like dust motes dancing in sunlight. Angela ruffled his hair, its tight curls springy under her fingers. Maybe the real treasure is that people start looking, not just for hidden boxes, but for the stories their houses hold. Later that afternoon, Preston Hale's black SUV pulled up in front of the house. He stepped out, no leather gloves now in the warm spring air, and surveyed the transformation taking place. The peeling paint was gone, replaced by a warm slate blue with crisp white trim. The sagging porch had been rebuilt, its new boards honey-colored in the sun. Angela met him on the sidewalk, wiping her hands on a rag. She'd been helping plant native wildflowers in the newly turned front garden, dirt under her fingernails and smudged across one cheek. "Quite a change," Preston said, his usual practiced smile replaced by something more genuine. "The house was always good," Angela replied. "It just needed someone to see it." Preston nodded, eyes taking in the neighboring houses where similar, if smaller, renovations had begun. A new roof here, fresh paint there, gardens carved from neglected lawns. "You've started something here. The whole block is waking up." Angela followed his gaze, seeing what he saw. Not just physical changes, but a shift in energy and possibility. That's how neighborhoods should work. One house breathes life into another. Summer arrived with a languorous heat that shimmered above the newly paved section of Braeburn Street. Window boxes burst with geraniums and sweet alyssum, their perfume hanging in the still afternoon air. Children's laughter echoed as they chased through sprinklers, the water catching sunlight and scattering rainbows across freshly mowed lawns. Even the ice cream truck's tinny melody seemed more hopeful as it wound through the neighborhood, leaving a trail of sticky-fingered joy in its wake. The official launch of the Kowalski Neighborhood Trust took place on a Saturday in July, beneath a rented tent on the community center's back lawn. Folding chairs filled with neighbors in their Sunday best despite the heat, paper fans fluttering like butterflies. A podium draped with blue cloth stood at the front, flanked by potted ferns and a blown-up photograph of Edward and Irene Kowalski that Angela had tracked down through the UAW archives. Malik fidgeted beside her in his new button-down shirt, collar already wilting in the humidity. "Is it time yet?" he whispered for the 5th time in 20 minutes. Angela squeezed his hand, her own stomach fluttering with nerves. Public speaking had never been her strength, but today's words felt necessary, like stones that needed placing in a foundation wall. "Almost," she murmured back. City officials sat in the front row. The mayor's representative, the housing director, even Mr. Daniels, the inspector who had once left that yellow notice. Behind them, neighbors from blocks beyond Braeburn filled the remaining seats, drawn by word of mouth and a small article in the Detroit Free Press that had somehow caught fire online. At the back, standing rather than sitting, Preston Hale watched with uncharacteristic stillness, his usual restless evaluation replaced by something like respect. When the community center director finally introduced her, Angela walked to the podium on legs that felt suddenly insubstantial. The microphone gave a soft whine of feedback as she adjusted it. "Thank you all for coming," she began, voice finding its strength as she spoke. "6 months ago, my son and I moved into a house that the city sold for $1. We were grateful for that dollar house. It was shelter after a hard time. What we didn't know was that the house already held a different kind of wealth." She told the story again, finding the tin box, reading Edward's letter, discovering the stock certificates. But this time, the narrative had a different cadence. It wasn't just about unexpected fortune. It was about legacy and intention, about how one family's choice had rippled forward through decades to touch lives they'd never know. Today, we're officially launching the Kowalski Neighborhood Trust with an initial endowment of $1 million, she said. The number still strange in her mouth despite months of planning. The trust has 3 main programs: a home repair fund for Brightmoor residents, a scholarship for neighborhood students, and a community history project to ensure other stories like the Kowalskis aren't lost. Applause rose like a wave, genuine and warm in the July heat. Angela spotted Mrs. Ortiz dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, Luis the foreman nodding with satisfaction, and Darius giving a discreet thumbs up from the side. "But this isn't just about money," Angela continued when the clapping subsided. "It's about remembering that houses aren't just buildings. They're keepers of our stories. Every home on this block has its own history, its own memories held in the walls. The Kowalskis understood that we belong to each other across time, that what we build today shaped someone else's tomorrow." As she spoke, she felt a strange doubling of perspective, seeing herself both in the present moment and from some future point, looking back. Would someone else stand at a podium decades from now, speaking of this day? Would the choices they were making now echo forward into lives not yet begun? After the ceremony, as people mingled, over lemonade and cookies from the neighborhood bakery, the mayor's representative approached, hand extended. "Miss Reed, what you've done here is remarkable. The city is interested in using the Braeburn model in other neighborhoods. This partnership between historical preservation, community investment, and resident leadership." Angela smiled, thinking of the months of late-night research, the meetings around kitchen tables, the spreadsheets that had made her eyes blur. It only works if people see neighborhoods as more than just real estate. As summer eased into fall, the ripples spread wider. 3 more houses on Braeburn found hidden treasures, not stock certificates, but artifacts that connected present to past. A cache of letters between brothers serving in World War II, a journal kept by a woman who'd helped on the Underground Railroad, a collection of Union badges and strike placards from the 1940s. Each discovery became part of the Community History Project, displayed in a small museum space carved from the community center's unused office. Malik started 6th grade at the renovated middle school, carrying a new backpack and the quiet confidence that came from stable ground beneath his feet. His teacher, Miss Barton, assigned a family history project, and he brought in the snow globe, still cracked, still cherished, to explain how one object could tell many stories. "My mom says it reminds us that sometimes things that seem frozen can move again," he told his classmates, voice clear in the attentive classroom. like our neighborhood. On a crisp October afternoon, as crimson leaves skittered along sidewalks and the smell of wood smoke hung in the air, Angela stood on their front porch watching Malik ride his birthday bicycle in lazy circles. The house behind her was fully renovated now, its bones strong, its systems humming with quiet efficiency. The plaque Malik had designed hung beside the front door, bronze letters catching the slanting autumn light. The Kowalski Legacy Home, where past meets future. Preston Hale's SUV turned onto Braeburn Street, no longer an anomaly in a neighborhood where property values had begun a steady climb. He'd changed too, his developer's eye now seeing potential for restoration rather than replacement. He'd bought the abandoned corner store and was converting it into mixed-use space. Apartments above, small businesses below, with affordable rents written into the leases. He parked and walked toward her, carrying a folder with the casual confidence of someone who had found a new way to measure value. "The history tour proposal," he said, handing her the papers. "The Downtown Development Authority is interested. They think it could bring positive attention to Brightmoor, maybe some tourist dollars too." Angela leafed through the plan, a walking tour of neighborhood homes with historical significance. The Kowalski house as its centerpiece, proceeds going to the trust. The idea of strangers traipsing through their living room still felt odd, but also right somehow, the house continuing its work as a bridge between people. "I'll bring it to the trust board next week," she said, tucking the folder under her arm. Preston nodded, watching Malik wobble through a turn on his bike. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad you didn't sell to me." Angela laughed, the sound rising free in the autumn air. "That makes two of us." As he walked back to his car, she felt a curious warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. It wasn't triumph. That would have been too sharp, too small a feeling for what had happened here. It was something deeper. The satisfaction of witnessing transformation, not just in houses or neighborhoods, but in people. Preston with his new vision, Mr. Daniels now advocating for residents at City Hall, Malik growing into himself like a plant finally given proper soil. The first snowfall of December came gently, fat flakes drifting past streetlights and settling on newly shingled roofs along Braeburn Street. Angela stood at the living room window, a mug of tea warming her hands, watching the world turn white and quiet. Behind her, a small fire crackled in the restored brick fireplace, casting dancing shadows across walls now painted a warm ivory. The house smelled of pine from the small Christmas tree in the corner, and cinnamon from the cookies cooling on racks in the kitchen. A year had passed since they'd first turned that key in the swollen door. A year of transformation, not just for the house or the neighborhood, but for Angela herself. The timid woman who had once counted change by dim light was now the executive director of the Kowalski Trust, managing a budget and staff, speaking at city planning meetings, mentoring other neighborhoods looking to replicate their success. Malik's footsteps thumped on the stairs, no longer careful around creaking boards that had been replaced. At 12, he seemed to grow taller by the day, his voice occasionally cracking mid-sentence, much to his embarrassment. "Is Mrs. Kowalski's niece still coming tomorrow?" he asked, joining her at the window. Angela nodded, watching his reflection in the glass. "Her flight gets in at 2. Luis is picking her up from the airport. Finding Irene Kowalski's family had been Malik's project, begun as a school assignment and pursued with the determination that was becoming his hallmark. He'd spent hours in the library, scrolling through microfilm archives, tracing marriage certificates and obituaries until he found Helena Nowak, Irene's sister's daughter living in Arizona. The letter he'd written to her, carefully composed, erased, rewritten, had received a tearful phone call in response. Now Helena was coming to see the house where her aunt and uncle had lived, to witness what their legacy had created. At 78, she was the last living connection to the Kowalskis, the keeper of family stories that existed nowhere, in public records. The next day, as weak winter sunlight glinted off fresh snow, a car pulled up in front of the house. Malik pressed his face to the window, breath fogging the glass, as Luis helped an elderly woman from the passenger seat. She was small, barely taller than Malik himself, with silver hair cut in a neat bob and a red wool coat buttoned against the cold. Angela met her at the door, heart inexplicably racing. "Mrs. Nowak? I'm Angela Reed, and this is my son, Malik." Helena's eyes, bright blue, alert despite her years, moved from Angela's face to Malik's, then past them to the entryway with its restored hardwood floors and vintage light fixture. "Oh my," she said softly, her accent still carrying traces of her Polish upbringing. "It's just how I remember it, only newer." They helped her inside, taking her coat, settling her in the armchair closest to the fire. Her gnarled fingers, spotted with age but steady, traced the edge of the tin box that Angela had placed on the coffee table. "Uncle Eddie's lockbox," she murmured, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "I remember him keeping it in his workshop. He was always squirreling away little bits of money, drove Aunt Irene crazy sometimes." She laughed, the sound surprisingly girlish. He'd say, "Someday this will matter," and she'd roll her eyes. As the afternoon deepened into evening, Helena shared stories that filled the gaps in their understanding. How Edward had survived the Great Depression by working 3 jobs. How he'd met Irene at a church dance. How they'd lost their only child, a daughter, to pneumonia when she was just 4 years old. How the 1950s strike at the plant had nearly broken them financially, but strengthened their commitment to the union cause. "They loved this house," Helena said, accepting a cup of tea from Malik with a nod of thanks. "Aunt Irene used to say it had a good soul. I never quite knew what she meant until today." After dinner, a Polish meal Angela had researched and prepared with nervous care, they gathered in the living room again. The snow had picked up, swirling past windows now dressed with curtains Irene herself would have approved of. Helena sat with a photo album open on her lap, showing them faded snapshots of Edward and Irene standing proudly on the same porch Angela now swept each morning. "I brought something for you," Helena said, reaching into her handbag. She withdrew a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "When Aunt Irene passed, a few things came to me. This should be here, in their home." Angela unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a small enameled box painted with delicate roses. Inside lay a woman's wedding ring, a simple gold band worn thin with decades of wear. "Irene's ring," Helena explained. "She always said the house should have it when she was gone." "I never understood that either until your letter came." Angela held the ring in her palm, feeling its slight weight, the smoothness of gold that had been warmed by another woman's hand through countless days of cooking, cleaning, gardening, loving. A life's worth of moments captured in a circle of metal. "We'll keep it safe," she promised. "It belongs here." Later, after Helena had been settled in the guest room and Malik had finally been persuaded to go to bed, Angela sat alone by the dying fire. The house creaked and settled around her, its sounds now as familiar as her own heartbeat. She slipped Irene's ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her, and thought about the strange symmetry of lives connected across time, by walls and floors, by hidden treasures and shared struggles. The next morning dawned clear and cold, sunlight turning the snow-covered street into a dazzling white canvas. Helena stood on the porch, bundled against the chill, as Angela and Malik gave her a tour of the neighborhood. The renovated community center with its history museum, the corner store now housing a coffee shop and bookstore, the other homes on Braeburn Street with their fresh paint and pride of ownership. At the small park that had once been an empty lot, children built snowmen and threw snowballs, their laughter carrying in the crisp air. Helena watched them, her eyes bright with memories. "Eddie would be so proud," she said, "not just of the money doing good, but of how you've honored their story. They never had much of a voice when they were alive, just 2 working people trying to get by. But now..." She gestured at the neighborhood around them, at the plaque on the community center naming the Kowalski Wing. As they walked back toward the house, a familiar black SUV pulled up. Preston stepped out, now dressed in practical boots and a parka rather than his once immaculate suits. He'd become a regular presence in the neighborhood, his development company now specializing in historic restoration rather than teardowns. "Miss Reed," he called, approaching with a folder in hand. The city council approved the historical designation. Brightmoor is officially Detroit's newest historic district. Angela introduced him to Helena, watching as he bent to shake her hand with genuine respect. How far they'd all come from that first cold day when he dismissed her house as overpriced at $1. That evening, as Helena shared more stories over hot chocolate, Malik suddenly remembered something. He ran upstairs and returned with the snow globe, its crack still visible, its glitter still frozen in place. "This broke a long time ago," he explained to Helena, placing it in her weathered hands. "But Mom kept it because she says it reminds us that sometimes things that seem stuck can move again." Helena turned the globe in the lamplight, watching how the trapped glitter caught and held the glow. "Your mother is a wise woman," she said, smiling at Angela over Malik's head. "And sometimes the most valuable things are those that have been broken and kept anyway." Later, after the house had quieted for the night, Angela stood again at the living room window. The street stretched before her, peaceful under its blanket of snow, porch lights glowing in welcome. She felt Irene's ring on her finger, a comfortable weight now, like the responsibility she'd taken on with the trust, like the love she carried for Malik, like the hope she held for their future. "Love and dignity," she whispered to the quiet house, echoing the words she'd spoken to Malik on their first night here, "are treasures that no one can steal." The house, as houses do when they are truly homes, seemed to sigh in agreement, settling its timbers around the family it now sheltered, adding their story to the many it held within its walls. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering all of Brayburn Street in possibilities as vast and gentle as the night sky above.